Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Amberdata Podcast. I am Izzie Henderson, our Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Amberdata, and I'm so excited to be joined by Annelise Osborne, who is the Chief Business Officer of Kadena and author of the critically acclaimed book, topping professional finance charts called From Hoodies to Suits, Innovating Digital Assets for Traditional Finance. Welcome, Annelise.
Thank you so much for having me on here, Izzie. I'm super excited to speak with you. And thank you for all the positive words on my book. I really appreciate it.
Right now, you are building scalable proof of work blockchains at Kadena. Before that, you got your MBA from Columbia, and you were in TradFi for 15 years. So just to start us off, can you walk us through that journey from the traditional side of finance to the experimental?
Sure. After college, I went and I worked in Europe. And so I worked initially in Kiev and then in London. And it was a little bit like Kiev was very much the startup world. London was a little bit more settled. And then, so I'd kind of had a little bit of both. But when I went to Columbia or after business school, I really wanted to do something more in finance because I'd done commercial real estate prior and work in Wall Street was my goal. And so at the time, commercial mortgage-backed securities were really new. And commercial mortgage-backed securities, the idea of it is kind of from taking commercial real estate, which I already knew, but the lending side. So it like increased the lending market by shifting the risk from banks' balance sheet. So if a bank made $100 million loan, that loan could technically default, and then the bank would be in a lot of trouble because it was a lot of money. So instead, they cut that loan up and they sold it to bondholders, and bondholders could buy either AAA or all the way down to the first loss fee. So they could choose their risk. So you had kind of the insurance companies and the hedge funds all buying different types of bonds. But what that also did, it was innovative in the sense that it decreased the cost of funding. So I love that even though it was corporate, I love the idea that we were kind of creating a new financial structure. There was a crisis in 2008. Commercial was different than residential. We kind of worked that out. So I was at Moody's rating agency, Moody's Investor Service, for 12 years plus 12, plus or minus. Yeah, so I had done that previously. I had done that, and then I kind of had left and shifted more a little bit back into startups. So I kind of throw in the early startups to having had that experience, having the corporate experience, and then actually through board work, I did a lot of corporate governance work. I got invited to join this regulatory task force for ICOs, and I didn't really know what an ICO was. This is back in like 2017, 2018. And I did a lot of research, which was really on YouTube at the time. There wasn't that much out there.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there were some articles, not that much. It wasn't kind of mainstream. It was really interesting also in the sense that one of the lawyers that had started this task force wrote a paper that went viral. And what is viral? Like in finance, you don't want anything to go viral because that means
That's a bad sign. If
right?
everyone's hearing about it, it's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, but to me, what it was is interesting is like I forget how many people read it, but it had totally taken off. And it was global. And there's a whole world of people out there. And if you think about ICOs really were a novel form of financing. So an IPO, initial public offering, is when a company is at prime and like very well established, and then they find public investors. Well, this is the inception of an idea. So you or I could come up with, like, we could decide together, we want to have an ICO because we know what we want to build, but it's before it's happened. And so we can have the best intentions. We go out, raise a whole bunch of money, but if we don't have the experience in running that type of company, it might not fly. And so there was a lot of fraud. But the fact that there was fraud and there was unintended consequences of people not having experience, I think, that had raised money, not just full out fraud. But there was very negative connotations to it. But the idea of having all these people that wanted to invest in the tech, like the new tech investments, and do venture capital investing themselves was really an eye opener to me also from a different perspective, kind of outside of traditional finance, that really things are shifting. So that was my like first step into like learning about the space and deciding this is what I wanted to do.
So then what was the impetus for you to go all in?
I found a partner who had a broker dealer, and we had the same mindset and ideas and goals, and we decided we wanted to do, in essence, traditional digital assets, like traditional financial structures, but using blockchain technology. Because the thought process, as if you try to do a different structure and a different technology, it's too hard for people to grasp. So the idea is provide them with what they already know using the new technology, and the thought process is that's how adoption would happen. And to be honest, our goal was really also to build out digital servicing, like the whole idea of, if you look at, I did fixed income for so long and structured finance, but if you, everything that is a bond or a loan is really an Excel spreadsheet that can be programmed. And
Right.
so you can just have programmable loans, programmable bonds that pay when they're supposed to pay. It doesn't mean there's no people involved, because you can still,
Yeah.
like, still right now it's all on paper and it's processed, but people step in if there's an issue, right? From servicings or special servicers or special servicers. So you can still have that same structure, but it can be fully automated, which leads to less error. It leads to more transparency. And so that's really what we were trying to create. We were a little early in 2018 and 19. One of the
Yeah.
issues is there's a cost to innovation, because
Mm.
there's a cost, you have the buyer and the seller. And if you're a fiduciary on either side, you want to get the best rate for yourselves. And so there's the additional cost of actually putting it on the technology. So it was really difficult to try to be, the middleman in a world where it doesn't work that way
Right.
for traditional structures. And then you had a whole bunch of people that thought they could get dumb money, and that doesn't work either. So that's not what we're ever focused on. We're really focused on how do we work within current regulation. So we did a private placement. So it was really focused working with FINRA. Our
Nice.
second deal that we did actually paid out in stablecoin that was and
Wow. Stablecoin is the real question.
die at the time, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
it was first getting die on exchanges, and it was super
Right.
interesting. It was just a while. It was kind of, really figuring out structure. No one had done it before, so there's no one to ask. So it was
Right.
you're really trying to set up a path. We were early in 2019, even we were emerging with Fluidity, which was the parent company of AirSwap. And we were in the boardrooms of all the big banks, having lunch. And in 2019, it kind of fell apart just because it was difficult to generate revenue. And I think that's where the baseline problem was. So that's how I started, but it was super, super exciting. I went to Arca. Arca is a hedge fund. Arca Labs is the innovation side. So I worked there. We have a tokenized treasury fund before Franklin Templeton, Wisdom Tree, and Blackrock. The
Love
idea
that.
was to have a tokenized, in essence, a security that it's a basket of treasury. So it's not really one treasury, but it would generate yield. And so instead of sitting on cash, I could have a liquid security that I could cash in and out of that generated 5% at the time, depending on what the treasuries were. And so the thought process there for collateral management, treasury management, all sorts of payment processes and programs to have programmable, in essence, something similar to programmable money that's a security that's whitelisted, KYC to AML. So that was exciting too. We were also, I think ARC is great. Love the people. Wonderful. We had a hard time generating, increasing our assets under management, which then would lead to liquidity. And especially then Franklin Templeton came out, and it's harder. It was hard to, I think it was hard to compete with larger names and institutions that had been around for a long period of time. Because if you're an institution, it's kind of, who do you want to give your money to? A startup company, even though it's a totally independent trust structure, or Franklin Templeton or Wisdom Tree or Blackrock. And so it was difficult. I mean, it's still around today. It's fully functional. But it was, so I did that work with institutions, working on creating new digital assets projects, partnerships, similar to what I had done previously at Propeller. Figuring out, helping companies create securities using this technology, securities within regulation. So,
I think that is a trend though, like with a lot of TradFi companies now coming out with, things that maybe the smaller startups were doing in 2019, 2018, and having their names attached to it and kind of eating up that competition. But I think there still is a lot of room for the innovation and growth that we're seeing in the smaller guys for sure.
I totally agree. But I also thought, when I left Arca to write the book, and while I was writing the book, I figured out, like, how can I help? How do I make change myself? And
Yes.
so I thought it was easy. I thought, having been in a number of startups now, it was really from the institutional side or from the tech side. And institutional side, because you have the money to the money and the vision, and I can be the translator, because I think there's, some people need to translate between the tech and the TradFi. But I'd already done that. And so I really, I didn't really want to go back to an institution. I decided I'd rather go on the tech side, and I had this great opportunity to join Kadena, and I did. And so super excited. I love what I do. I'm super excited
Right.
about it. It's just, I wish it was a little faster, but we're turning a tanker ship. And so it just takes time. And
Yeah.
so it takes kind of innovation. It takes working together. It takes working with, educating and working with regulators and legislatures to understand what's being done, and that it's not, there's negative connotations associated with blockchain crypto. And so
Yes.
teaching them about actual benefits of the technology as opposed to the headlines that we've seen in the past.
Definitely. And so we will definitely get into some of these differences in perception and the sort of the bad rap that Bitcoin and blockchain have in traditional finance. But so if for anyone that doesn't know, the response from Hoodies to Suits has been pretty phenomenal. And just to give a brief overview, because we're going to be using some of the language from the book. So Annelise is really going into the tech industry hoodies. So like, your Mark Zuckerbergs, and how, now that industry and the startup industry is coming face to face with TradFi suits, right? Through this new technology, through generational and cultural changes, and through policy. Something else I loved from this book was that, you really center the idea of Web3 being an upgrade to capital markets rather than this foreign beast that I think right now is really hyped to be. So really great way to begin to understand blockchain technology and how it's up-leveling finance. So with that, let's talk about the shift in TradFi and in crypto. First, I'd really want to explore language and how it's influencing the perception and sentiment on this new technology. I think something you speak about in your book, maybe a less talked about concept, but definitely a theme throughout, is that TradFi in the entire world has been implementing new technology over the past 25, 30, 50 years, right? It's transformed the speed of transactions, liquidity, interoperability, the internet, the Web2 social revolution. We've had these different phases of technology come through to finance and have been completely integrated into the system. So, me looking at TradFi now, right, looks different to what it would have 30 years ago, but it operates largely the same. Maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. But I think when we speak about Web3, there's this concept of blockchain, which is a new technology, and then Bitcoin or any crypto, which is very nascent, rather volatile asset class, right? Do you prefer the umbrella term crypto to refer to the blockchain technology and digital assets, or do you separate the concepts out?
It's interesting because I think it depends who you're talking to.
Yes.
So I used to, previously I would say that I was really more blockchain focused than crypto, but part of that is because people would ask me, what do you think about in crypto investing and what are the prices? And
Yeah.
that said, now I'm at Kadena. We're a layer one proof of work blockchain that has a liquid token. And
Right. So I mean,
it's like
and can, right? Yeah.
they need to move together. But I also think that mentality wise, the world is going to go to more public chains. I think institutions are recognizing, like the intranet and the internet, that we can do a lot more with the internet than we could with having like an intranet billboard site. So private chains are much more kind of, centralized databases. But it's a step in the process of all of this. So you'd asked about language. I think there's a lot of one, the Hoodies have created, and Hoodies are tech entrepreneurs, like you had mentioned, who have created this tremendous, what is it, $2.5 trillion, depending on the day, ecosystem of like financial markets. And so there's no discounting what they have created and done. But to get it to the next level, I think you really need the Hoodies, which is the understanding of regulation. I think without that, there's been false starts. There's also been problems with, regulators or jail time, or as well, right? I think in between there needs to be that education, because it's gray right now with regulation, and it can't be gray. It has to be black and white, because you have to know, you can't play in the gray if you're an institution that's been around for a long time.
Absolutely.
But I do think that we need the Hoodies and the Suits to work together to take this to the next level. So it's definitely, and to work together, you need to understand that language. So that's where there's the definite barrier that I was referring to. And so if we look at it, there's similarities between the two. We talk about wallets. Well, it's the same as an account, right? We talk about keys. They're the same as passwords. There's nuances, but generally it's the similarities. We talk about DeFi and some of the lending in DeFi, like it's like private credit lending, right? And so
Right.
I think that's going to be, I'm a huge believer TradFi and DeFi will merge. There's things that we have to, with KYC AML, there's little things that we need to get
Right.
past. But I also think it's so much more efficient. To your point, we had fax machines before. There used to, I mean,
Yeah.
earlier there wasn't like pre-post office. You deliver a letter by a horse, right? And so like every little bit helps. Think about high frequency trading. It took a while for, I don't know if anyone's read Fast Boys, just, the idea of how long it took to actually to have it adopted, and look at the money that has saved. People also made money on high interest rate markets and low interest rate markets. Like there's different ways for us to generate revenue. So the idea and the concerns of kind of blockchain coming in or things being automated, I think it makes us more efficient, and it allows us to innovate more. I do think we will innovate faster kind of on the innovation curve as well, if we think about what AI is allowing us to do with programming and code, which is something totally else. But for your question about language, there needs to be like a translator between the two. And yes, this technology is increasing, and I think we look at it as upgrading. I don't think finance is broken. It's been around forever.
Right.
I just think this is a way to take it to the next level.
So then, honing in on sort of hoodies and suits, like literally how we dress, right? In your book, you mentioned, when Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Bankman-Fried goes to testify in trial or Congress, like they're putting on suits, they're looking nice, they're looking professional, they're playing a different part than, they're usually depicted in their tech environments. Amberdata, so we sit on the institutional side of crypto. So like I'm at a conference, I'm in a suit with sneakers on, right? There's a lot of conveying this very much in between state that we are at right now. I'm saying I'm in finance, but I'm speaking a tech language. Do you think that, for the hoodies and suits to be able to communicate, to speak the same language, that there's going to be more of a consolidation of casual environments on the financial side? Maybe. Or are the hoodies going to be able to adopt more traditional practices, show up in the suits, and be able to speak finances language rather than the other way around?
I think they're culturally, if you think about what's happened kind of after COVID, and the whole world of athleisure wear. So I do think
True.
that's right. I was at the crypto finance conference the other day. It was all suits.
Yeah.
And it was more CFOs and accounting standards. But I feel at some point you have to bring your authentic self out.
Mm.
I think I always thought it was kind of more powerful if you can dress a little bit outside the norms, which I think is kind of what the situation was when everyone started, Zuckerberg could wear his hoodies all the time, and you don't have to think about what you're wearing if you wear the same thing all the time. I totally get that, which is almost the same as wearing a suit, right? You don't have to think about what
Right.
you're wear. A little different for women.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but but culturally it's tough. I think we will swing different ways. I think different companies like to be more formal than other companies, but I think there's an acceptance of that more casual aspect, or probably just the differentiation in dressing. I feel like kind of younger people want to dress up and look more formal in suits because they're younger, like just from a perception of being taken seriously. But then I will be thankful to this wonderful woman who told me. I was on a panel for an investment bank's investor day, and it was probably 150. It was a very suited crowd. It was a rainy day. I was on a panel and I was talking about, this is back in 18 or 19. I was talking about digital assets and security tokens at the time, and blockchain. And I was dressed in kind of I was dressed more corporate because I was in front of a corporate crowd. And I was told after, because I'm talking about innovation, I should dress a little bit more risque. So like whatever fits me. Risque not as in anything, like nothing show,
Right. Yeah.
not showing any skin, but really just like the idea of wearing leather pants, right? Just something.
Uh,
And it's so funny because I never really thought before, and even writing the book, I don't really think that much about like cultural and dress, but I feel like it is part of it, right? People pay a little bit more attention if you're a little different and what do you have to say, and it's almost powerful to be on a stage wearing something that's slightly different. But to your question, I think some companies will stay more formal. I think some events will be more formal. Back in 18, there was a lawyer. Our lawyer was a corporate lawyer at the time. Would keep hoodies, like a hoodie outfit and jeans for him to
Wow.
switch into for meetings with tech companies. So I don't know that,
Interesting. I mean, but it does speak volumes to how each industry really operates and like who's sort of given the stage and like how, you're supposed to be aware. But I think to your point, having that individuality and that sort of style and being very comfortable in it is something that, in Western culture, it's very celebrated to be individualistic anyway. And I think I totally see that in financial markets as well. Okay, so then social media. With crypto, so we've seen GameStop, right, explode. It's not just crypto, it's the stock market in general, but crypto is open 24/7. It's a market that never closes, meaning that it's really prone to liquidity issues, mass panic. How do institutions approach this intersection between instantaneous news, social commentary, and an asset class that's just not closing? Is this a risk that they're preparing for?
So I don't know that. I think institutions are definitely paying attention. I do think that the world has shifted. It's almost global with the different global markets. If you think about emerging markets traders, or there's somebody covering the desk because,
Right.
Japan market will be open
Exactly.
when we're closed. But in the same sense, this is different because those still have market hours. I think I love the idea of not having banking hours. Think about, well, we haven't gotten really into the next generation, but the expectations of the next generation is different as well.
Yeah.
I have opened a bank account on my phone,
I
right?
did literally last week.
It is very like just the fact that I don't have to go to a bank.
Yeah.
I don't really use cash. And I can do everything on my phone. And if you think about, like, this is a supercomputer that we hold in our hands, and the access that allows us, and the expectation that allows us. So social media is a little bit different, but it's still on your phone and it's an app. So what happened with GameStop, where a Reddit, Wall Street Bets was a Reddit subgroup that was talking. My 13-year-old son at the time told me all about it because he was following it.
Oh my God.
And it was so interesting to watch. Um, and the market, the price of GameStop obviously went drastically up. Not in their fundamentals of the company were not the driver of it going up. It was the social media discussions.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is they looked into it after, and it wasn't, there was actually no charges pressed. There was not kind of one person front running the stock. It was really kind of a conversationalist in a chat room that believed in this, and then it kind of market hyped went up. And so I think that will happen again. I do think that it's almost the power of the crowd. Um, but there was nothing illegal done, as in, like, when the SEC investigated, there were never charges brought up.
Right.
And so I think that's interesting. I think if we look at Elon Musk when he came out,
Yeah.
right, when he spoke out about a cryptocurrency, and it
And it.
shut
Woo.
up Bitcoin, right? So there's different, what is the responsibility of people saying things on social media? Then shift it over. I think institutions have to pay attention for the information that we get online. So those are different instances. But if we look at, there was a study done in the UK, 85% of Gen Z get their financial information from finfluencers. Finfluencers are financial influencers that they see on social media. Social media
Wow.
could be TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, anything that they have people come out and are self-proclaimed financial influencers, right? And you can go by looking at the number of followers they have, but there's no check about what they are sharing with people. And so that's super interesting. I really do think that the next generation of wealth advisors and RIAs, that will shift. There'll be more private investments. There are already more private investments, which are more bespoke than are from the stock market. There's fewer public companies today than there were yesterday.
Right.
Not specifically today and yesterday, but
But
go back 20 years,
yeah.
right? Like, and it's dramatically lower, and more private companies, because there's the burden of going public. Maybe there's a bunch of different reasons that people are staying private. But those private investments and more bespoke investments, it's harder if for me as an investor to actually figure out what I want to invest in because I have to do more research. So it's
Right.
almost like I feel like they'll rely more on wealth advisors and RIAs to actually figure out what to do. But those wealth advisors and RIAs, due to kind of regulation and concerns, if they're an institution, are not. What are they doing on social media? How are they looking to attract Gen Z and millennials? And if you think about Gen Zs and millennials, they are going to have majority of the world's wealth shortly because there's a great wealth transfer happening. So there's this big
Right.
kind of macro overhang of money in globally, actually, that's going to this generation. And this generation, we go back to the phone, is natively digital. So there has to be something with social media that institutions today are going to figure out how they can use that.
Exactly. And I was honestly just going to bring up the great wealth transfer because I think, seeing this movement from boomer, Gen X to millennial and now Gen Z, not to out myself, I'm technically Gen Z, but in the Gen Z that grew up with like VCR and like cord landline phones. So, but I am a part of a generation that's been learning some form of technology since we were born, really, even if it was a flip phone. How do we bridge that language between Gen Z and boomers to even do that transfer in finance?
Well, I think if you look at companies like, if you look at kind of the Fidelity and the Franklin Templeton, they were first movers kind of in the crypto investment world. They're also generally private companies. Fidelity is private. Franklin Templeton is public, but it's a majority owned by the Johnson family. And so I feel like they have that mentality where you're not having a CEO reporting every quarter about what the share price is. I think helps with a longer term mentality like family office investing, right? Family office want to continue to generate wealth and hold it for the long term. So I think the mentality of longer term is helpful.
Yeah.
From a boomer perspective, I think it's that idea of change and learning, right? People need to want to still change and learn. You don't want to be Kodak or Blockbuster or someone that's kind of fallen apart because you didn't keep up with the times. So I do think it's important, not just kind of from a generational perspective. Generational could be investing, which is a little different, right? And the other investing, we didn't, Blackrock did a study about family office, how they hold their net worth. Well, when I studied finance in school, it was 60-40 stocks and bonds. BlackRock's study shows family offices are 60-40 alternative and traditional.
Wow.
60
Massive.
traditional, 40 alternative. So it's very like it's the world is changing and it's different. And I think kind of the to the boomers and the Gen Z, they're just there needs to be an understanding from a company perspective about, like, if we're talking from a TradFi perspective, right? The companies need to understand this change and shift. So it's not just kind of the boomers that are retired. It's really like the ones that are running companies. Millennials are 40 and are starting to, run companies and have management positions themselves. So I think that's
Right.
super helpful because just the different mentality of thinking. And the fact that people are afraid of change. Generally, there was a study done in 2019 that monkeys can accept change so much easier than people can. And
What happened?
it's just interesting to think about that as well. So it's outside your comfort zone. It's harder to digest, but I think that, we need to continue learning.
Definitely. And I think we're seeing that now in that, the path forward for crypto adoption and TradFi is going to be a very long one. But something I've noticed even in the past year is that more people are in the room willing to hear about it, right? Like that shift sort of took a while, but now even maybe, companies aren't ready to necessarily put their money where their mouth is, but they are ready to open their ears and sort of see what other people are doing.
Well, exactly. Highlight to that is the ETFs. So we have the
Absolutely.
Bitcoin, we have ETH, ETFs,
Yes.
and BlackRock, right? BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager by AUM. JP Morgan is the largest bank as well. And it's interesting. These two are really leaders now in the crypto traditional asset blockchain world. And the idea of the ETF also is a recognition by regulators and investors that this is a different asset class. Crypto is a different asset class, Bitcoin and Ethereum, that have fit into a traditional finance wrapper. So
Yes.
now I can buy it just like I could buy, or a boomer can buy it just like they can buy anything
They know
else.
how to do it. Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It's this traditional rails, but they're investing and getting exposure to something in the crypto world. And so I think that's a huge step on this process of coming together, both from a regulatory perspective and also from, the whole traditional perspective of the boomers and the different people that haven't paid attention before. It's becoming more normalized.
Definitely. And I think, in terms of for where we sat during the ETF approval, a lot of us thought when Bitcoin, the ETF gets approved, Bitcoin's going to reach new highs. We saw those highs sort of happen. And then when the ETF actually came out, the sentiment wasn't necessarily there. We saw the ETH ETF definitely not have the performance that I think a lot of people were expecting it to. Sort of what's your take on the ETFs in terms of adoption versus, really being a vehicle of investment?
I guess adoption could take so many different hats.
Yes.
So the way I would like to see adoption is I would like to see digital bonds. I would like to see more funds tokenized. I think there's a lot of benefits, both from an increased in revenue and a cost savings perspective, that we can see this. We just need to work on interoperability, which is interoperability between chains, but also between chains and companies. So I think there's a difference between adoption and investment.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
kind of, different ways to look at it for sure. But I do think it's a step in the direction. I think it takes a while to change the mentality, like we had talked about before in investing. I do think that it's going to continue to grow. I also think the ETFs are actually those aren't day traders. And so that will also lock up a chunk of capital that won't be trading Bitcoin. And if you think about that, the liquidity will shrink. And if you think about supply and demand, there's ideas of how that might affect value. So I feel like that makes it the thought process of decreasing risk and volatility if you have more of it locked up, is something to think about. That's, cryptos have always been seen as volatile because there's not reserves behind them unless they're stable coins. Generally, there's not, with Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's not a chunk of money behind it that is like for like, right? It's not a currency
Right.
from the same perspective as the US dollar is, which has led to different volatility. But I do think that adoption is coming. I think it's a step in the process. I think of all the tokenized treasuries that are out there. I think treasuries being used as tokenized treasuries able to be used as collateral. I think these are all a step in moving forward. I think Bank of NY Mellon, Bank New York Mellon, that they can now custody funds like that. This is all a step in the direction. I think looking at what's happening in different sandboxes out in Singapore, for example, looking at some of the POCs that they've done in Europe for debt, I think that's huge as well. Looking at the world of crypto investors down in South America, like there's so many steps that we're moving forward. We're just not moving forward overnight because we're dealing with securities, which are highly regulated. We're dealing with money, which is regulated.
Yes.
So it's
And
not the same as information in Web 2, which was really information and data that wasn't regulated at the time. This is different because it's money.
I think that's a really good point, because when we saw Web 2 and that evolution happen, like the regulation came after the boom, right? We're dealing with both at the same time. And in fact, like I think a warring sort of growth where, we need the regulations to grow, but you need to grow before you get a regulation for something because you need to understand actually what you're defining. Just going into the POC hump is sort of what I call it, right? There are some amazing POCs out there. You mentioned Singapore. I know, Project Guardian, Project Orchid over there have been amazing. JP Morgan's got Onyx. We have all of these really great projects happening. But how do we get over that hump of sort of this, I guess, middle zone of putting money into a project, but not being quite ready to, to go for it more? I think tokenization, RWA, we're seeing a lot of great things. Like we've got Blackrock tokenizing funds, tokenized debt is amazing. But I think right now we're in this POC land. So what's your take on that?
I think we've been for a while. I think the idea right now, we're kind of running parallel, digital twins for most things. I think we need to show how we can generate money or decrease costs. There has to be some cost basis or some financial gain in this. I think there's people out there like Mike Cagney at Circle. I think not Circle, I'm sorry, Figure. I think what Figure has created is really impressive because they created a whole program. They didn't create a proof of concept. They created a program, and they're able to show that they can save about 150 basis points on deals. And that's what we need, is we need to say, look, we really will save money when we actually roll these out. I do think Onyx, I don't think Onyx is a POC. I wouldn't call them a POC. Because they actually do a lot internally. So their JP Morgan coin makes them faster, cheaper, better internally because it's a depository receipt, so they use it within the bank. And last year they saved $20 million on it. And that's when they weren't using it very much. They're using, from what I had read, it's about tenfold now this year.
Wow.
About their use of the JP Morgan coin in repos. And this is just me gathering data from different articles. It is not quoted from a JP Morgan source, articles. And so that makes me think that that's cost savings is going to multiply. But we need examples like that for the POCs. One POC is going to cost money because you're going to have the legal cost, you're going to have the digital twin cost. And so it's actually creating the program, but we all have to start somewhere to make sure that we're plugged in and it makes sense. This is where a lot of things right now are working on private chains, whereas I think there's going to be a step to public chains. If you look, a lot of companies are doing POCs on public chains in some of these sandboxes. And so the open chains, public chains, same thing. Permissioned, absolutely. There's different permissions. But so I do think there's a migration, but a POC is a step. It's kind of putting your toes in the water to move forward. Also, people want to make sure that they're not missing out, I think so. But I do think we're going to get there. It's just, to your point, it's not going to happen overnight like it did with, the Web 2, for example.
So interoperability, institutions historically have struggled with this to foster transparency, to speak to each other in the same language. I think that has traditionally been the hardest thing. That's also something that blockchain and public blockchains solve for. Is there any resistance here, right? Because at their core, some institutions may not want to be necessarily transparent. Maybe they don't want instantaneous settlements, right? And they need that buffer of slower tech to process and feel secure. Have you seen any of that sort of tension there?
Absolutely. They don't want 24/7, 365 as well, which we started talking about, and then I got off. Sorry. Fortunes have been made with not inaccurate, but information that is different on both sides, right? And so there is a question about, if we all have the same access to information, ideally it would decrease the bid-ask spread, because it wouldn't be deemed that, Bob knows more than Alice, but it would, so that is kind of more efficient markets, right? So yes, not everybody wants to actually have free range of information. I also think there's problems that could come in with some funds and marking to market all the time if it actually was fully liquid. So that's come up. Even the immediate settlement. So a lot of times, not everybody, if I might want to sell securities and I might enter into a sale, I don't have them at the same time. And so that's something to think about as well. So maybe one day is better than 10 days, but so there are different things, but you can build a lot of this into the systems as well. So I do think that there are ways we can work to make things work for us. You don't have to trade 24/7, right? It doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be the case. And so
if it has the capabilities to do it, doesn't mean that actually has to be the system you implement.
Yeah. And the same with, with information is more difficult. There's so much data out there. Data, right? It's everywhere. It's just, how do you use it? So I do feel like access to information and data is coming anyway, but obviously people have made lots of money when they have more data than someone else. And that will continue to be the case, right? Investing in data is expensive. Data is today's gold.
I mean, I love that you mentioned data, right? Something we as Amberdata really like to see is that data is so important and it's so valued in financial services, and that poor data, I think in your book, you said it had a cost of like $13 million a year to like just an individual company, trillions of dollars a year in the industry in general. So at Amberdata, enterprise data is core to who we are. And we've seen how, even though this blockchain data may be public, it's really, really difficult to clean, to normalize, to aggregate it into these actionable insights. But then once you have it, the possibilities are endless, especially now that we're seeing so many AI models and this other wave of tech coming up. How do you think blockchain data combined with this AI boom are going to have an impact on financial services?
Sure. So blockchain data, you know where it's coming from, and it has the opportunity to be much more clean than
Right.
um, other data sources. And so, because you have that, you understand provenance. And so I think that is huge. I think that's going to be hugely beneficial. When you have more things digital, you're going to have more access to data. From the financial world, it will help looking at previous trends. It will also help in predicting future trends, which is really what we're looking, we're all looking to have an edge. And I think understanding data and using data to our advantage can give us an edge. I do think we need to use our own, I think data is a tool.
Yeah.
So we still need people analyzing and making the final decision as fiduciaries, because I do think, trust will always come into, as we were talking before we started recording, how important human relationships are in
Yeah,
business.
definitely.
I still think that will play a part, but I think data is huge. And also, if we look at, we haven't got to moving ahead yet, but look at look at Web 2 companies, right? I think we'll have big Web 3 companies because of
Right.
look at the top data companies in the world. This is in the book too, right? IBM is number one, but you also have Google and Amazon, and Google and Amazon's main business is not data, but they still are one of the top 10 global data companies because this is an ancillary business for them, that data is so important, is where I'm going.
We love to hear that. And then so sort of finishing up this section, but I wanted to talk about retail investors, right? Retail investors are holding 51% of the wealth. So far in TradFi, they've been investing in that other 49%. Retail investing also in crypto is a very different beast. There's almost a personality to it. It is not a cult of personality, but genuinely a lot of investment is based on likes and dislikes, on trends, on community. If institutions start tapping into retail investors, do you think the demand is going to come from retail investors wanting those more diverse investment options? Or is it going to come from TradFi who goes, wow, I have this pool of investors that now using this new technology, I can actually, gain liquidity from, lowering these investment barriers. So I guess just what kind of lift is there going to be on either side?
I think you're going to see it from both sides. I think, and both sides think very differently, as you're pointing out, right? I think that the retail investors are not always rational, and they're not always looking at data, but it might be kind of community oriented, which is similar to we talked about with GameStop. But I do think there's different likes of exposure, but investors have this, institutional investors sometimes have the same thing. They like certain markets over other markets. It's probably less like I like the color blue better than green, which might be a retail investor. But I would think there's similarities in the ideas of I would like to do this and diversify this way. I think this technology allows you to diversify so much more if things are tokenized. The institutional investor, I feel that they will probably right now stick to very similar types of institutional oriented investing. And I think it will come together. Ideally, you would think it would be that the 50, what percentage basis. So it's about half and half. I would think institutions are longer term holders generally than retail.
Right. Right.
And so it's just, I think there's like every individual investor has their own risk profile and investment portfolio. But I do think that retail investors invest differently and they invest more generally bespoke. That said, if you look at all the funds, so much is tied up in mutual funds, right? If you look at mutual funds, kind of the increase in ETFs, you look at all the retirement money that is sitting generally in funds, in diversified funds. I feel like if a fraction of that goes into alternative investments like cryptos, that's huge. That's huge for the market. I used to have the numbers, so I don't have them at my hand. Like
That's okay. We can
that's to think about it,
huge is
right?
a good number. Yeah.
It's much larger than the current crypto market is today. And so just a tiny fraction of that would make it a multiple. So yeah, it's interesting to think about kind of where we're going to go and how we're going to get there and who's going to move first.
Right.
I think it's probably going to be the institution moves in larger dollar amounts,
Yeah,
and retail is a whole bunch of people with smaller dollar amounts.
exactly. Exactly.
So it's gonna, I think a lot of the shift will be with the great wealth transfer to the younger generations. I teach at universities, and I was at one the other day, and people did not have crypto in that class, which was interesting because it was a finance class.
Right.
They had more mutual funds, but I've been at other classes where almost everybody owns crypto in the class. So it's just interesting that it might be, obviously it could be the school and the type of
Yeah,
students
it
that
could be the school,
go,
but
right. But it
also,
was
yeah,
just super interesting to think that not all Gen Z are buying crypto. It's also
absolutely.
interesting. It's interesting that it's a very much male female as well. Like it's
Yeah.
a very male oriented investment in crypto. So then which is also similar to alternative assets. So then it's trying to get more female investors in alternative assets.
And I think something I've been noticing as a woman in crypto is that there have been a lot more, I think targeted outreaches towards women going, hey, you can do this too. You can invest in this. And I've seen even some like NFT projects that are like, we have this, this set of art and you can invest, but you should probably be a woman. It's much more geared towards women. And we haven't really had investment opportunities necessarily marketed towards women in the past. So I think that's a really exciting thing about crypto.
And it's education too. I know that there's a bunch
Absolutely.
of other places that are educating
Yeah.
people about what crypto is to get them comfortable with the idea of it, kind of like introducing, anyway.
All right, perfect. So looking ahead to the future of both industries, or maybe the same industry, you mentioned before that you think DeFi and TradFi will merge. Can you explain that?
Sure. I think DeFi and TradFi will merge in certain, if you think of what DeFi is, it's really lending, right?
Right.
Also taking a step back, if I own cryptocurrencies, I own them in my wallet, which means I'm taking money out of my account at the bank
Hmm.
to hold a stable coin in my wallet. And my wallet I control, the bank doesn't control. And then I can control my account, which is really my wallet, right? I've taken the money out of the bank into my own, and then I can lend that out to someone else, and I can be the bank. The bank makes money by lending the money you have in your account generally out to someone else. And they take that interest that they from lending, and they give you a little bit of it, but they really take that spread. Well, I can be the bank if I hold it in my wallet and I use one of the kind of DeFi lending protocols, right? So that's a different, if the world shift towards everyone having their own wallets, but I don't think everyone wants to do that. My mom does not want to do that, right?
No.
And so it's kind of like probably an 80-20. Most things go down to
Yeah.
80-20. So I do think there's that. So I do think banks are going to have to kind of think about that. But also the idea of DeFi and TradFi merging, I think a lot of those that lending could be done within regulations when we figure this out within TradFi. So I think there's going to be a lot more, think of complicated derivatives.
Yeah.
Those are programmable. All of this is programmable. Like the more complex it is, the easier, like the better it is to program, because then we actually have transparency as to what is happening and where it's going. I also think kind of the bruise for adoption, we have, I think payments, I think debt, and I think kind of funds are really what we're seeing, where we're seeing movement in, because I think there's traction and there's benefits for each one from a financial perspective. Payments, obviously cross-border payments, instantaneous payments. I
Yeah.
cashed a check months ago now, but it took 5 days to clear. And
Wow.
5 days, I'm sitting personally, I'm waiting for that money to come in so I can use it. For an institution, they could actually think of the velocity of money would increase. You could continue to invest it, and that would be beneficial, right? If instead of waiting, I mean, sometimes settlement takes 2 weeks, right? For some institutions or longer. And that instantaneous settlement, if we're working from a payment perspective, would be very beneficial. From programmable loans and then tokenized funds. From an institutional perspective, I think those would all be very helpful. And those are not necessarily TradFi and DeFi, that's kind of tokenized TradFi, but I do think that will be benefits. Also, if you go and look at Aspen Coin had, which was something that was at the Aspen St. Regis in Aspen, Colorado, there was a part of that was tokenized. And there's benefits that go along with owning that token that are utility oriented. And
Yeah.
so I think not only will we have kind of the stable coin and the DeFi lending merge with TradFi, I think there's the opportunity to have utility benefits merge with TradFi as well. And utility benefits, be it like if you own that token and you stay at the hotel, you can get upgraded, you can get a bottle of champagne. There's a number of different things that count towards that. You could think of it like airline miles, but there also could be a value to the utility that could be associated with some of these investments. If you think about Amazon Prime and Amazon stock. So Amazon Prime are super users of Amazon, right? If you had the constant feedback from super users, your best customers, you can have a better company. But right now it's Amazon stockholders that benefit from that and not the Amazon Prime, but that could be merged together. So I do think there's different opportunities as we move forward that are taking the best of kind of both crypto, DeFi, and TradFi.
Definitely. And, just on DeFi, TradFi, and banks, which I think we already covered banks in the sense that we have online banking. We're not cashing checks generally, right? Like we have this supercomputer on our phones. We're able to move money. We're able to do anything we want to with money, open a bank account, etc. I hear constantly in crypto circles that banks are going to become obsolete, right? I don't think banks are going to become obsolete, but they will have to adapt. How do you see in the next couple of years banks adapting to what we need them to?
I totally agree. I think that they will still be around. I do think there will be some large Web3 companies that, like
Yeah.
a Google and Amazon, that come and are solid, quote unquote, institutional like players. If you think BlackRock has not been around that long, and they're obviously institutional. So from a bank's perspective, they're going to have to figure out how to work closer with Millennial and Gen Z.
Yeah.
They're going to have to do more online. I think AI allows opportunities for kind of chatbots to actually reconnect with people and engage. I think there's going to be developments in that for the next generations. So there's an adapt function that's going to happen. I think they'll have to figure out how to work with the idea of me being the bank, but my mom wanting to keep her funds in the bank.
Right.
And so I would probably not keep all of my money in a wallet. I would still keep money in a bank but the bank could change, right? I could be stable coin that's kept at the bank. It could be, banks are really for payments, right? And they're the most regulated groups because they're touching everyone's money. But I do think, what if we have an account that I've got my money, I've got my alternative assets, my traditional assets in it, like I have everything together. Maybe that's a new type of account or wallet. You can call it whatever you want to call it. So I do think that the banks will adapt. There's a lot of very smart people out there. There's a lot of forward thinkers. And I do think some of the newer companies will give them a run for their money.
Definitely. That's what we like to hear as a as a startup. We've only been around for 5 years, but that's sort of the trajectory we're on. So last question. The economy moves fast, crypto and its technology move faster. So since writing your book, would there be anything else you would add to the conversation?
Well, the ETFs, Bitcoin has approved before the final edits. That went in. And then obviously BlackRock coming out with tokenized funds, the tokenized funds being used as collateral. These were all kind of the progress as we see it. So none of them, I think, are hugely, nothing is counter to anything that's in the book, but they're just adding to, right? As time will add to, more people will be involved. More people are looking at tokenizing funds that are big names. More people are looking at stablecoins advancing. CBDCs are having more probably the same conversations. But I do think it's just exciting to see that we're on the path. It is slow. It's unfortunate that right now crypto seems politicized because we're in an election cycle, but I do think it's a nonpartisan issue and that we will move forward. So I'm super excited about where we're going. And if we look out 2, 5, and 10 years, that's really where we're going to see the change.
Absolutely. And then I guess I lied. Lastly, any recommendations for resources or educational pieces for anyone listening who's starting their own journey into crypto?
Sure. Well, obviously, I'd recommend my book, From Hoodies to because the whole goal of the book was education. So I wrote the book because I was talking to a bank that said they had a cease and desist talking about anything crypto. for until next year. And so I thought education is the problem because FTX was bad actors. This technology is sound. So
Yeah,
let's explain what's happening in traditional finance because there were no other books out there for TradFi at the time. And so that's kind of the whole thought process here.
absolutely.
I also, so one, I think my book is a good primer. I
Yeah.
do a lot of podcasts. I do a lot. So I think podcasts are great. And reading articles out there as well. YouTube videos and watching kind of webinars, I think is super helpful. So all of those are helpful to learn.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to speak with you. And anyone listening, you can find From Hoodies to Suits linked in this episode. You can get it on Amazon. And thank you so much for hopping on, Annelise.
Izzy, thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.